Hey there, insightful listener. Welcome back to another deep dive. You know how this works. You bring us the material that's piqued your interest, and we roll up our sleeves and really dig into it. Together, we try to unearth the golden nuggets of wisdom that are sometimes hidden beneath the surface.
Absolutely. We like to think of it as a collaborative exploration, really. And for this particular deep dives, you've pointed us toward a fascinating area, the foundations of faith, as presented in Chapter 02 of your source material.
Right on. So we're talking about the bedrock beliefs that are laid out as essential for cultivating a way of thinking that's oriented towards healing.
Yeah.
It's all about creating that solid base, that foundation, upon which a new understanding of health can be built.
Precisely. And as we delve into these foundational ideas, I think we're in for some pretty profound aha moments. Because what we're essentially talking about here is the very nature of reality itself, and how our thoughts interact with that reality to shape our experiences, especially when it comes to our health and well-being. So, shall we jump right in and start unpacking these foundational layers?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Now, the chapter kicks off with a pretty big concept right out of the gate. The one living substance. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement right there.
It is. And it's not just talking about some static inert matter out there. This one living substance is presented as the source of everything, literally everything. It's described as this single, formless, intelligent energy or force or consciousness, if you will.
Yeah.
And this substance didn't just create the universe billions of years ago and then step back. It's actively permeating and sustaining everything in existence right now, including us.
Okay, so it's like this sort of universal underlying intelligence that connects everything. I mean, that's a big idea to wrap our heads around.
It is. And the chapter even offers the analogy of a superfine ether, so fine that it permeates all matter, to help us grasp this concept. It's this omnipresent, vital force that is present in and through everything, connecting it all. But the key takeaway here is that it's not just present, it's alive, it's intelligent. This living substance has a form of consciousness, and its life energy is the only life energy there is.
That's a powerful concept right there. So how does this tie into the idea of health?
Well, if we're talking about healing, I think it's crucial to recognize that at the most fundamental level, we're dealing with this vibrant, intelligent life force that underpins everything. This substance, this life, is inherently whole and complete in itself. So if disease arises, it seems to suggest a deviation from this fundamental wholeness, a sort of discord or imbalance within this interconnected web of life. It's not that the living substance itself is flawed or diseased, it's something else, something that's come about through other means.
Interesting. So how does this living substance actually go about creating things? We usually think of creation as a physical process, like building something with our hands, but this chapter is talking about something much more subtle and, dare I say, mind-blowing.
Yes, it certainly challenges our conventional understanding of creation. Because according to this chapter, this living substance creates by thinking. Its very nature is to assume the form of whatever it focuses its attention on, whatever it thinks about. So when it contemplates a specific shape, that shape manifests. When it thinks of movement, movement is initiated.
And the chapter gives us some really vivid examples to illustrate this. Like the mere thought of a specific form leads to the creation of that form. It's like the thought itself is the blueprint, and the substance simply molds itself accordingly. And then there's the example of motion being generated simply by the substance thinking about movement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it goes on to talk about even grander things like the creation of an entire world or a majestic oak tree happening through these precise sequences of thought motions. And what's really interesting is that it emphasizes these sequences being unchangeable. In other words, certain thought patterns within this living substance will always and inevitably lead to the creation of specific forms or processes. It's not random or arbitrary. There's this direct causal link between the originating thought and the resulting manifestation.
So it's like a fundamental law of creation, a kind of cosmic blueprint. If we can grasp that concept, then it seems like we're already starting to see the power of thought in action, right?
Absolutely. And if this is how everything from a tiny seed to a vast galaxy is formed through this living substance, bringing things into being through thought, then where do we as human beings fit into this picture? Where do our bodies come from?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, we are physical beings. We have bodies that seem very real and solid. So how does this living substance create something as complex and intricate as a human body?
According to this chapter, we are not an exception to this grand scheme of creation. Our bodies, too, are formed from this original substance. They are the result of specific motions initiated as thoughts within this all-encompassing consciousness. So, just like the oak tree or the world itself, our physical forms, are essentially thought forms, brought into being through the creative power of this living substance.
That's a pretty profound concept to consider. If our bodies are essentially thought forms, does that suggest that our thoughts can influence our physical bodies in some way?
That's a question we'll be exploring in more depth as we continue our deep dive. But to lay the groundwork for that, the chapter goes on to discuss how our bodies actually function, and it neatly categorizes our bodily functions into two main types: voluntary and involuntary.
Right, like the difference between consciously choosing to move our arm and our heart beating without us having to tell it to.
Exactly. So the involuntary functions are things like our digestion, our circulation, the beating of our heart, all those vital processes that happen automatically without us having to consciously think about them. And the chapter states that these involuntary functions are governed by what it calls the principle of health that operates within us. Think of it as an innate intelligence within our bodies, a sort of self-regulating system that keeps these essential processes running smoothly.
So like an internal autopilot that keeps things ticking over?
In a way, yes. And the really interesting part is that the chapter claims that this principle of health, when it's not interfered with, performs these functions perfectly. But there's a caveat. It can only operate perfectly if we think in a certain way.
That's where the connection between our minds and our bodies really starts to come into play. So what about those voluntary functions, the things we do have some conscious control over?
Yes, those are the actions we consciously choose to engage in, at least to some extent. Things like eating, drinking, breathing, and sleeping. These are all essential for life, of course. And the chapter emphasizes that how we perform these voluntary functions, how healthily we manage them, has a direct impact on our overall well-being. If we consistently make poor choices, like eating junk food, not drinking enough water, not getting enough sleep, we're not going to be in optimal health no matter how positive our mindset is. So there's this crucial interplay between our mental outlook and how we care for our physical bodies through our daily actions.
So it's a two-way street then?
It seems so. But let's circle back to that idea of us being thinking centers. I mean, that's what makes us unique as human beings, right? Our capacity for thought.
Absolutely. The chapter emphasizes that we have this remarkable ability for original thought, for creating new ideas and concepts.
Precisely. But it also acknowledges that our knowledge is finite. We don't have a complete and perfect understanding of everything. We're prone to making errors, to holding beliefs that might be flawed or incomplete. And this is where things can potentially go awry, especially when it comes to our health.
Because if we're creating our reality with our thoughts, then thinking unhealthy thoughts could manifest as unhealthy physical states. Is that what it's suggesting?
That's the idea. If the original substance, in its perfect wisdom and completeness, consistently holds thoughts of perfect motion, perfect function, complete life, if it never conceives of disease because it is the very essence of life itself, then our own imperfect, incomplete thoughts could be creating a discord within our own systems.
And to make matters more complex, the chapter introduces this notion of inherited imperfection. It calls them racial subconscious impressions of imperfection and disease, which we essentially inherit from previous generations. That sounds like a pretty heavy load to carry.
It does. The idea here is that over countless generations, humanity has collectively built up these deeply ingrained, almost unconscious beliefs about our limitations, about our susceptibility to disease. You could think of it as a sort of collective mental programming that we inherit without even realizing it. It's not genetic in the traditional sense, but rather a set of beliefs, fears, and expectations about health and illness that have been passed down through generations and embedded in our collective consciousness.
So it's like we come into this world already carrying a backpack full of limiting beliefs about our bodies and their capabilities.
That's one way to look at it. And the chapter is very clear in stating that this is not our natural state. It's not how the living substance intended things to be. It's a deviation, a distortion of the original blueprint, so to speak.
Which then brings us to the idea of nature's true purpose, which is presented in a much more positive light.
Absolutely. The chapter describes nature's fundamental purpose as the continuous advancement of life towards perfection. And that perfection includes perfect functioning, which is essentially perfect health. It's a beautiful concept, really.
It is, and to illustrate this, the chapter uses the simple but powerful analogy of a seed. Every seed contains within it the potential for a fully grown plant. Life inherently strives to expand, to grow, to express itself more fully. It's a drive that's woven into the very fabric of existence. And since we as human beings are expressions of this living substance, this life, our inherent nature is also to move towards wholeness, towards perfect health.
Precisely. And everything within us and within the natural world is ultimately supporting that process of growth and expansion towards wholeness.
Okay, so if that's nature's true purpose, if perfect health is the inherent truth within this original substance, then how does this perspective explain the existence of disease?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the chapter offers a thought-provoking answer. Disease, from this perspective, is not a fundamental reality. It's not something that the living substance created or intended. Rather, it describes disease as a state of imperfect functioning that arises from imperfect thought. And by imperfect thought, it means both our own individual thoughts in the present moment and those inherited subconscious impressions of imperfection and disease that we've been talking about. It's like a combination of our own negative or limiting beliefs about our bodies and a collective inheritance of fear and misunderstanding about health that has accumulated over generations.
So it's like a ripple effect of thought, with our individual thoughts interacting with this collective pool of beliefs to shape our experiences of health and illness.
Exactly. And to drive this point home, the chapter poses a really intriguing question. What if humanity had consistently held perfectly healthy thoughts throughout its entire history? Would we all be in a state of perfect health now? It's a hypothetical, of course, but it really makes you think.
It does. It places a lot of emphasis on the power of our thoughts, both individually and collectively. So, given this perspective, what is our role in all of this? How do we as individuals relate to this concept of health?
Well, according to this chapter, when a human being is in perfect health, they are essentially a perfect reflection of the perfect thought of the original substance. It's like we are living embodiments of that original blueprint of wholeness and vitality.
So when we are in alignment with this living substance, our bodies naturally function perfectly.
That's the idea. But the flip side of that coin is that when we experience imperfect health, it's because we are not consistently thinking and acting in ways that align with that perfect blueprint. It's a combination of not cultivating thoughts of perfect health and not engaging in those voluntary functions, eating, drinking, breathing, sleeping, in ways that support our well-being. It's like we've stepped out of harmony with the natural flow of life and created a discord within our own systems.
Right, so it's not just about positive thinking. It's about aligning our entire way of being, both our thoughts and our actions, with this principle of perfect health that is inherent within the living substance.
Precisely. And to really crystallize these foundational ideas, the chapter concludes with a syllabus of basic truths. It's like a distilled summary of the core principles we've been exploring.
Like the key takeaways, the things we really need to grasp to understand this whole framework.
Exactly. Shall we go through them together?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first basic truth is, there is a thinking substance from which all life originates. This is the fundamental reality, the very ground of being. The second truth is, thought within this substance is what creates form and motion. And for humanity, this originating thought is always directed towards perfect health. The third truth is, we as human beings are individual centers of thought, and our thoughts have the power to directly influence our bodily functions. This means that imperfect thoughts lead to imperfect functioning, and this is further compounded by unhealthy voluntary actions. The fourth truth is, by consciously cultivating and holding only thoughts of perfect health, we can restore perfect internal functioning, especially when we work in harmony with that power of life within us. However, to truly manifest this perfect health, we also need to engage in healthy actions in our daily lives. And finally, the fifth truth is, the two essential steps for us on this journey are to diligently learn how to cultivate and maintain thoughts of perfect health, and to consciously learn how to nourish our bodies through the healthy practices of eating, drinking, breathing, and sleeping.
Wow, that's quite a syllabus. But it really does capture the essence of this chapter, doesn't it?
It does. And for you, our insightful listener, I think the key message here is that to truly understand and embrace this approach to healing, we need to start with a fundamental shift in our understanding of reality itself. We need to grasp the idea of this all-encompassing, intelligent, life-sustaining substance that is the very source of everything. And perhaps even more importantly, we need to recognize the profound power of thought, both the originating thought of this living substance and our own individual thoughts in shaping our experiences, especially when it comes to our health and well-being.
It's a big shift in perspective for sure, but once we grasp these foundational principles, we can start to see how they might apply to our everyday lives. And that's where things get really exciting.
It is exciting, because if we can align our thoughts and actions with this underlying principle of perfect health, then we open ourselves up to a whole new level of well-being.
And that's a journey we'll be exploring in more depth in future deep dives. But for now, I think it's worth pondering this question. How might consciously recognizing this one living substance, this underlying intelligence and vitality that connects everything, change the way you approach your own health and your daily choices? What if you truly embrace the idea that you are fundamentally connected to this perfect source of life and health? How might that shift your perspective and your actions?
That's a powerful question to sit with. And as you contemplate that, remember that this is just the beginning of our exploration. We'll be delving into the practical applications of these principles in future deep dives, exploring concrete ways to integrate these ideas into our daily lives. So stay tuned for more, and until then, may your thoughts be clear, your actions aligned, and your journey towards greater well-being filled with insight and inspiration.
Keep diving, everyone.